Okay, I'm going to read a few pages from Tarana Burke's book, Unbound. And this is when she started to become a full-time counselor at 21st Century, which was leadership training for Black folks. And she's running one of the camps with young women. As it often did, that one confession led to others, and more girls shared their experiences openly. I became wrapped up in supporting them in the moment. I wrote names down. I passed out tissues to wipe tears. I checked in and comforted, almost on autopilot. At some point, it occurred to me that I hadn't checked in with heaven. My eyes darted around the room until I found her. She didn't see me looking at her because she was no longer there. She hadn't physically left, but even with all the upheaval and movement around her, she was perfectly still, emotionless. I looked at her face and posture, and I didn't have to see her eyes to know. She was me. I was transported right back to being 15 or 16, sitting in a room full of crying teenage girls sharing horrible stories that I could never ever repeat because I never allowed myself to confront the truths of what had happened to me. I would find a place to retreat in my mind, careful not to be so tuned out that folks felt the need to check on me. I would demur and become invisible. I was watching heaven do it right before my eyes. She had faded into her own world of safety. The girl with a mouthful to say, ready to defend anyone she deemed defenseless, was doing her best to defend herself. I didn't approach her, I just made sure to keep checking back throughout the rest of the night. We closed out the session and the girls, most of them emotionally drained, went to bed. The next morning, I was back on my routine, and so was Heaven. Someone approached me and said that she had gotten into an argument at breakfast. When I got a report like this, I usually went and got her and either talked to her or gave her an assignment or somehow made sure the rest of her day went better. But that day I didn't. Later in the morning, we passed each other going between the main building and the dorms, and as she walked by, she loudly whispered, "I need to talk to you." I felt my pulse quicken. I knew what she needed to talk about, and something in me, everything in me, couldn't have that conversation. I mouthed back, "Okay," but in my mind, I was already figuring out ways to get out of it. By the late afternoon, it was obvious that I was avoiding her. The week was almost over, but there was no way I could keep this up for the rest of the time she was there. I didn't even fully understand why I was avoiding her, or at least I wouldn't let myself say it out loud in my head. I was coming out of the cafeteria, not paying attention, and suddenly she was coming toward me. "Miss T!" she screamed as she ran over and threw her arms around me. I tried to feign a bit of excitement, but I had started to sweat. "Where have you been?" She was exasperated. "I have to talk to you." "I'm so busy today, girl. Can we talk later?" I asked, trying to pull her off me so I could walk away. "No," she was firm. "We need to talk now." My stomach was starting to turn. She took my hand and pulled me to the side. As she held my hand, I realized that I was terrified. She stood directly in front of me with eyes begging to confess, to confide, to release. "Miss T, last night, whew," she started, then stopped herself. "It was a lot." I could feel my bladder pulsating against my pelvis. "I just have to tell you about what happened to me. I never told nobody before." I wanted to scream. Inside, I was screaming. "It's like my stepdaddy, really my mama's boyfriend," she continued. "He did stuff to me." I mostly only heard words and phrases after that. Nasty, don't like it, afraid, hate him, disgusting. I don't know how many minutes passed. I don't know how much of the story she had told. I just knew at some point I could not take another minute. This young girl who reminded me so much of myself was putting me right back where I didn't want to be. So I cut her off mid-sentence. "Okay." I must have said it more loudly than I thought because it clearly startled her. "Okay, Heaven, this is not my area. You need to talk to Miss Malika." "Miss Malika?" Her face was awash with confusion. Which one is that?" Heaven's voice had softened, and I could tell she was trying to understand what was happening. She was trying to understand my reaction to her story. "The one with the head wrap, I'll show you. She can help you better than me, okay?" I had already started physically moving away from her. I was good at moving away, getting away from this, all of this. I always got away. But Heaven had not met me as an adult who ran away from her. She had met me as an adult who ran toward her, who embraced her, who told her she was family and that she loved her. "Miss T?" She sounded astonished. "You just going to walk away like that?" It felt like a knife had been plunged into my heart. The disappointment in her voice twisted the knife even deeper. "No, baby, I'm not walking away. I'm so busy right now, and this is more for Miss Malika to deal with. I knew the frustration was building in her chest, but I just wanted her to relent so that I could get away. I was going to lose my ability to breathe at any moment. Miss Belika? She repeated, staring at me as if giving me a moment to reconsider. Yes, Heaven, I insisted, feeling the cowardice creep up the back of my neck. She stared for a half-beat more, still in disbelief, and simply said, "That's okay." And then she turned on her heels and left, but not before shooting me one last glance. And although it was only a quick second, it was long enough for me to see that sweet little round brown face with the big grin sour and curl the corner of her lips in disgust. The campers were starting to pour into the building for lunch now, but I never took my eyes off her back. As she disappeared into the crowd, I saw her posture change. It was as if the armor we had worked to chip away was materializing again before my eyes. I knew I was wrong. I also knew I was terrified. I was supposed to be the one changing lives. I was supposed to be leading by example and showing them what was possible when you stepped into your potential. And there I was, a fraudulent after picture. I didn't want to do what I had done. I didn't expect a 12-year-old to knock me off my square. I'd been compartmentalizing and prioritizing my thoughts and emotions for many years at this point. Every move I had made, from becoming a 21st century leader to excelling in track and field, to being a student activist, to coming to work for 21C, every single positive step took me further from the negative parts of my life and recast me as a person who wouldn't have to deal with such things. Inside of 5 minutes, this child was threatening to undo the order I had created, while she was simply trying to lean into what I had promised her: family, connection, love. I was desperately trying to run away from all she reminded me of: betrayal, loss, shame. Inside, I was running from room to room like the house was on fire. And then my brain did what I had trained it to do. It went into protection mode. "You're not a social worker or a counselor," I insisted in the solitude of my mind. As she was walking away from me, possibly forever, I kept thinking about her face when she finally got me to stop and listen. She knew what she was about to say to me, but there was no fear in her eyes. Instead, she looked relieved. I wondered where that courage came from. How had she managed to do the thing that I had still not figured out to know how to do, with a head start almost double her 12 short years? I wondered how, at the very least, I had not been able to meet her at the apex of her courage. In my early organizing training, our elders told us that to be an effective organizer, you had to meet folks where they were. I had to find what was common between me and the folks I was trying to reach, and then let them know what skin I had in the game and how my work would help meet their most basic needs. It never occurred to me for a moment that those guidelines could be useful here. It didn't occur to me because I had never been here. I was not thinking about what I had to give Heaven, just what I wanted to keep from her. After all, I didn't see my story as my gift, only as my shame. I knew what it felt like to know at least one other person understood what you'd been through. I could have been to her what Maya Angelou was to me, but instead I let her walk away. I let her leave me worse off than she met me. It wasn't the details of what she had experienced that resonated with me. It was the feeling it left her with, the confusion, the questions, the anger, and the sadness. It was the need for a way out or a way forward. There was only one thing I was compelled to share the whole time, and she was talking, and she was like someone else was whispering it into my ears. Not me, Tarana, who was standing there desperately trying to be desensitized, but another version of me, one that was saying, "Tell her, she should know. Let her know what this feels like. Share yourself. Be who you said you are." And then it was just that one thing on a loop. Tell her it happened to you too. 2 days later, camp ended. It was now Heaven who was avoiding me, and I was so ashamed of what I had done that I let her. I asked Malika to seek her out and ask if she needed anything, but I didn't follow up with her myself. I was sorting through a range of feelings, but mostly I was wallowing in my cowardice. On the final day, I decided I would be an adult and at least try to say goodbye and maybe apologize, but I couldn't find her. I asked around and found out that a small group of Selma kids had been picked up in a van and she was likely with them. She was gone, and suddenly it seemed like my life and hers depended on me righting this wrong. I asked some of the folks from Selma, and each sent me to another one, trying to figure out who she was connected to and how I could reconnect with her. I always came up empty. Days later, after camp ended, I was still thinking about her and feeling pangs of guilt and shame. I was trying to come to terms with what had happened between us and what my response meant in relation to the work I had said I wanted to do. That familiar feeling of being a fraud was creeping into my spirit, and I hated it. It made me think of the wisdom of our elder Uncle Ted, who cautioned us never to lie to the young leaders. He said sometimes you may have to hold back for their own sake, but don't ever lie. He explained that young people could sniff out deceit and inauthenticity like bloodhounds, and once they caught wind of it, there wasn't much you could do to turn it around. He said your credibility is your capital with young folks, and you have to safeguard it. I wished so badly that I could have formed these rational thoughts that day with heaven. Now the question remained, what would I do next time? I began to obsess over how I would do the whole thing differently. I wrote down notes and played out conversations and practiced my delivery, but it felt flat to me. I went to the bathroom, tried to look in the mirror, but my brain could not sustain the scrutiny. I turned my head away several times before I made myself envision heaven. I closed my eyes and conjured up her round, brown face. I stood in front of my sink, directly facing the mirror, with my eyes closed, and slowly opened them. It took a few tries, but eventually I was staring at myself. My armpits were tingling and my breathing was quick and heavy, but I made myself look at my reflection. I needed to find at least a piece of the courage heaven had found. There was no one here but me, and I wanted to know that I could at least trust myself to stand in my truth. I slowed my breathing as best I could and felt the words inching their way from the pit of my stomach up toward the back of my throat, where they stopped. It felt like I might choke on them. I commanded myself to keep breathing. The words were almost there. I opened my mouth and they crept out, one small syllable at a time. I was raped. They molested me. I didn't want it. I didn't like it. I'm sorry. This is what I felt. This is what I spent so much time ducking and dodging and twisting and contorting to avoid. These words, my truth. It was a truth my mother never asked for. It was a truth none of my family or friends ever knew. It was a truth no one was there to validate. It was a truth I ran from for so very long. But it was a truth I knew I needed to unravel, if not for myself, for the love of the girls like me who could be saved. For the next girl like heaven I would meet, and there would be so very many. It was out of my body for the first time, and I was still alive. I was still standing, with my truth on the outside.